Hi guys, it's Kelly Latavola here, and I'm back with another installment of What Would Kelly Make? Today we are talking about embossed resist. The one I'm doing today in particular is a watercolor embossed resist, but there's several different ways that you can do this. I am working with the Simon Says Stamp Kind Flowers and the Kind Bold Outline. That was the one that I chose to work with, and I just thought that it would work just really well for this technique. So I'm working on Canson watercolor paper. I have treated the paper with my anti-static tool, the embossing bag, and then I'm going to stamp the large cluster that's in the set in Versamark ink. Versamark is a clear sticky ink that you're not really going to be able to see when you first stamp it down, but it's going to create a sticky surface for our embossing powder to stick to. Because this is a little bit of a larger stamp, I decided to go ahead and stamp it twice, since the beauty of the MISTI is that you can do that, and I might as well make sure I have a good impression. So I'm using white Simon Says Stamp embossing powder. You can do this technique with any kind of embossing powder. I just really love white. I love the clean look of those white edges and the color that surrounds it. So I'm going to heat set this until everything is melted and smooth. And then from there, we're going to get into the actual technique. So I'm working on a Ranger craft mat. I've picked out some distress inks. In the technique video, if you watched that one, I actually used oxides, but I liked the way the distress inks looked better, so I switched. I'm putting down a little bit of clean clear water, and then I'm going to start dropping the pigment in to the where it's already wet. This is, you can see the embossing powder completely resists this because it's water-based. So you can do this technique with anything that is water-based. If you, distress inks, distress oxides, if you have water-based markers, Tombow, or what are the other ones I have? Memento. And then you can also do this, like if you have the ink blending tools for distress inks or distress oxides, you can do that as well. It will, that embossing will resist it no matter what, and creates this really cool outline effect. So because mine is watercolor, was what I wanted, the look that I wanted, I put down the pigment, and then I'm going to go in with some clean water and just put that around the edges as far as I want it to spread out. And then I'm just going to kind of let the water do its thing. I really prefer the way that this looks with, well, I prefer the way anything looks with bolder, brighter color, because that's just me. But you can definitely tell, even when it's soft, even when it's just one layer, you can still clearly see the image that we stamped down. Like I said, I like bright colors. Bright colors make me happy, so that's what I'm doing. And you can keep adding pigment in as long as it's wet. You won't get any hard edges. After it's dry, you can still add more pigment. You're just going to have some harder edges, which can be pretty. So it just depends on the look that you personally want. So once I got the color down, on the left-hand side there, that peacock feathers is kind of creating a weird line. I'm going to go in and blot that up. In this particular one, I didn't really have to go in and blot up any color that was pooling on top of my embossing, but that can happen. So you can do one of two things. You can blot it up before it dries, or you can dry it down and then use a damp, not a wet, because wet will completely reactivate the inks in the background. A damp, like baby wipe or paper towel, and just very lightly buff over the embossing to bring it back to that like bright, shiny white. So like I said, I'm going to keep adding until I'm happy with the way that it looks. I also really like spatters in my watercolor, like especially when it's something like this where it's really loose. So I did spatter all of the colors. I like when they mix together, so I'm not being very particular about where they go, but that's just me. Once that was done, I dried it down. You don't have to worry about like reactivating the embossing powder with the color on there. You're not going to ruin it. It'll be fine. And then just to get a little bit more interest and break up that color, I am sprinkling on just some clean water. The longer you let it sit, the more color that it will pick up. I let mine sit for just a little bit before blotting it up with a paper towel, and you can see how it broke up that color in the background. I wanted to add some depth. There is nothing, let me just say this. There is nothing wrong with the piece the way that it is. Okay. It's beautiful. You have a beautiful stamped image with gorgeous colors in the background and this really cool technique. There's nothing wrong with it, but I'm a colorist. And I love adding dimension to things, and I love making them stand out and creating a focal point that really pops. Typically because I do make a lot of one layer cards, so I'm used to adding that detail. So I am adding that detail with Prismacolored pencils. And I'm going in between the embossing, and I'm starting with my darkest color and then blending out with my lightest color. For regular colored pencil coloring, I would not recommend doing that, but because these areas are so small, I don't really have to worry too much about my blending. It's just such a tiny area, it's gonna blend just fine. The only time that I really did anything different was for the letters, which in the end you cannot even see, but I wanted to show you anyway, because at this point in my process, I wasn't sure how I was going to use that die cut. So I put down the darker blue, blended it out with the lighter blue, and then because it's a larger area, when you're coloring with colored pencils, they're basically filling in the fibers of the paper. In order to kind of like cheat that, so I don't have to do like 4 layers of the blue colors, I used a white in between, and that white will help A, blend the colors, and then B, also fill in the fibers so that I can go back in on top with the blue again, and it will be a much smoother result. I notice that when I was doing this with the smaller flowers, because they're very detailed, and these flowers are also, by the way, included as separate stamps in the stamp set, so you could build your own bouquet, which I totally love. I'm all about anything that you can do to make it your own. So anywho, for those particular flowers, with the lines, it was almost impossible for me not to get colored pencil on my embossing. This is just me showing you with the pink. I did the same thing, you know, with that little cheat with the white colored pencil. But anyway, so it really was very difficult to keep, even with super sharp pencils, which you should have, by the way. It was very difficult to get in between those lines and not to get any coloring on the embossing. So then I started messing around with it because I didn't want the color on top of my embossing. I wanted a bold white embossing. Before we go there, I like to add, like I said, I want that focal point to pop. So I like to add a drop shadow to images like this. So basically I'm adding a shadow as if the light source was coming in from the top left-hand corner. So everything in the bottom, or I'm sorry, top right-hand corner. I know directions. So basically the shadow will be in the bottom left-hand corner. And even with just one layer here, you can see with the darkest color how it pops forward from the background. I am going to go over it with a medium and then a lighter color so that it blends better into the background. But you could even do just that one line and get some really awesome results. So anyway, back to this colored pencil on top of my embossing powder. So when it first happened, I was like, okay, well, I'm going to go in and I will try to erase it with a regular eraser. Don't do that. It was a no-go. It basically smeared, because these colored pencils are wax-based, it basically just smeared the wax all over my embossing powder. Then I tried to go in with like a sanding eraser. That also did not work. After that, I was like, okay, so it's wax-based. I need something that's going to break up that wax. And I just on a whim tried alcohol. And I tried it first with a wipe. And then I was like, okay, that totally worked. But then I thought maybe I could get better control with a Q-tip. I actually had worse results with the Q-tip. So I ended up switching back to just the wipe, and I very quickly just kind of wiped it over the top of it. The only thing I will note, and I don't know if you can see, I tried to close it up, it made my embossing powder dull. It was not shiny anymore. And it's kind of a cool look, honestly. But if you want it to be shiny, just reheat it. That's what I did. I reheated it, and then all of the shiny returned back to my embossing powder, and it was like that never happened. So that was something that was kind of cool, I guess, to learn, because I'm all about the learning process. I'm learning right along with you guys. So I have a strip of Simon Says Stamp black paper here, and then I'm going to do the same thing with the white heat embossing. This is something I do all the time. I love white heat embossing on black paper. I just, it has a very like bold kind of graphic feel, and I'm all about that. So in this stamp set, there is a kind that is separate from the one that's built out, and they match perfectly. So that is the one that I stamped. I didn't have to re-stamp that whole floral bouquet. I could just stamp the kind. And I'm going to go ahead and heat set that. There are a ton of such great sentiments included in this, and the one that I chose was "Thank you for being so kind." And then once that was heat set, I went ahead and put my die in place, ran that through my Big Shot. After it was done, I laid it on the card, and I realized that I loved the black with the bright colors, but it felt like it needed something else. And so typically I don't bring in other things, but for this one, I just felt like it was necessary. So I'm using a diagonal stencil and some black soot distress ink and an ink blender to create just a very small strip at the bottom that has a black diagonal stripe. It doesn't fit the full card size, which is A2 4¼ by 5½. So I did have to just kind of like scooch it up and realign it, but it wasn't a problem. Now I've trimmed down the painted piece. I think ultimately it ended up being like 3 3/4. And then I'm going to glue that to just some white fun foam. This is going to obviously pop up the painted piece, but it's also going to straighten out really quite a bit of the warping. So I won't have to worry about it being kind of wonky on my card. So I'm going to glue that down. And then for the kind and the rest of the sentiment strip, I added a ridiculous amount. I don't know, I get so worried that they're going to fall off in the mail. Not that I mail them, because I'm terrible. I like to make the things. I don't ever really mail the things. But anywho, so I put a bunch of 3M Scotch foam tape behind that, so it's like doubly popped up, and like double the layer, double the fun. And then I also popped up the rest of the sentiment, you know, once I trimmed it down into the little banner there, in order to just kind of accent that. And I'm all about the shine. I did pick up some clear sequins to put kind of to the left and the right hand side of the sentiment. And then I put these down with liquid glue, but I always go back in with glossy accents and put that in the center because I feel like it really holds them on there and they're going to be super secure. The last thing that I did was use just a clear glitter pen. I filled in the letters of kind, and then I also hit the flowers in the background. And that is the whole card. So I hope this kind of inspired you, if you've done this before, to kind of revisit this. This is such a great technique. And if you're new to card making, to maybe give this a try. So thank you guys so much for joining me, and I will see you next month for the next installment. Bye.